Hello and welcome to the Accounting Influencers. Let's try that again. Hello and welcome to the UK Matters in Accounting show with me, Rob Brown. On behalf of the Accounting Influencers podcast network, we are the only daily accounting and fintech show in the world going out every day of the week, apart from the weekends where we give you some time off. And this is our UK focused show where we bring in special guests and comment on UK matters in accounting. I'm thrilled to have with me today one of the big influencers in the UK scene. It's Will Farnell. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rob. Nice to be with you.
Will, I'm surprised you're still standing. You were at Accountex Manchester or Accountex North yesterday, and we're going to deep dive on how that went for you. But it's great to have you fresh as our roving reporter out there. You were doing seminars, you were walking the floors, you were talking to vendors. What's your overall vibe, Will, 24 hours later?
It was a great day, Rob. The show last year was split over 2 days, largely down to it being the first show post-COVID. So they wanted to kind of spread out exhibitors, spread out the people, and the show effectively replicated day one in day two. So it's really nice to have it as a one-day show. It had an amazing vibe, lots of people there. I got to do the rounds, catch up with a number of vendors that I often only get to talk to at these kind of events. And the vibe was really positive. So everybody said they'd had a great show. Quality was good. So I think everybody left Manchester very happy last night, other than the A17 being closed on the way home. It was a marvelous day.
Yes, thank goodness this is a UK show, because we do have international shows as well. I was talking to a couple of Americans yesterday, Will, and trying to explain the North-South divide here in the United Kingdom. And they've heard of Accountex, and obviously the flagship show is the London show at the Excel Arena. It's been going there a few years. You've been many times and spoken there. But tell us a little bit about the thinking behind the Accountex Manchester, the Accountex North, because I guess the Northerners, and I'm a Northerner, born and bred in Hull, we want the world to know that there is life above the Watford Gap, don't we?
Absolutely, and I think regional shows are great. I mean, it's a long way from certainly really north of the border in Scotland. It's a long way down to London. Manchester's kind of a bit more palatable.
Well, it's still a long way from Norwich, where you're based, isn't it? What is that,
everywhere's a long way from Norwich.
Well, fair enough.
So I'm used to that, but I think regional shows are great. It means that it's accessible for people that can just take that day out rather than it having to be 2 days in terms of overnight accommodation. And I think it's really good that we kind of get to give everybody where they are the opportunity to get along to these shows. Accountants, by their very nature, are always busy. There's always plenty going on. So actually making that commitment to be able to say, right, I'm going to block a day out is much easier than saying, like, I've got to block 2 days, 3 days out of the diary to kind of make this work. And there's so much going on that this is where people get to learn. They get to mix with peers and share learnings, and collaboration communities, such a big part of the profession, certainly here in the UK these days. That's very different to kind of where it was 15 years ago when I started my firm. If I had the communities and things back then that were available to new firms today, it would have had a massive impact on kind of how we ran and what we did. So I think it's really important that people get to go to these events and get to feel part of that.
Well, we get that it's a slimmed down version of the London Excel show, which has hundreds of seminars, hundreds of exhibitors, thousands and thousands of accountants and professionals coming in. What was the footfall like yesterday, Will, and the busyness of the stands? Were the vendors happy?
Yeah, certainly the feedback I got from vendors, everybody was really happy. As you always get, the seminar program ran at the same time slot, so it was kind of between sessions that the floor got busier. The layout of the show was that there was a theatre in each of the four corners of the hall, so everyone was moving between theatres. And they moved between the theatres, clearly they were going through the centre of the exhibition area. The refreshments were slap bang in the middle.
Okay.
But yeah, it felt really good. The theatres were pretty much full for most of the sessions. I'm sure we're going to talk about those sessions that got a bit more airtime than others. And I'm sure listeners can have a good stab at the kind of sessions that pulled the big numbers. But yeah, it felt really good. It always seemed to be busy, and certainly so the vendors I spoke to were really pleased with the conversations they'd had.
Yeah, and we'll get you on our best practice in accounting show to talk about the panel you were part of on failure to implement and the challenges involved in pushing through processes and change projects and tech for accounting firms. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, let's talk about the topics, Will. Obviously, Martin Bissett, our co-host here on the show, was helping in curating that agenda. It is always difficult, isn't it, to get a handle on what will chime with a particular audience. Obviously, we know the technical subjects and tax and MTD is going to go down well, which is boring, but it's bread and butter for accounting professionals. Give us a feel for the kind of themes that were discussed and what went down well.
It was a really mixed bag, Rob, which is great. It's what you want at an event like Accountex.
Yeah.
You stole the thunder there. Clearly, it was MTD. It was new tax penalty regimes. All of those technical sessions, as you might expect, drew really big crowds. One of the panels that I was involved in around kind of building the digital firm, the tools that digital firms are using was standing room only mid-afternoon. So that was really positive, but real mix, everything from kind of mental health, personal well-being, through to employee retention. Technology clearly played a big part as it does at these events. And then of course the technical subjects were always those kind of highly visible sessions.
How come MTD is still resonating, Will? It was obviously big a couple of years ago and it came out and the government was pushing the agenda, and then it got deferred and seemed to be put on the back burner, but it's obviously still getting traction.
It's the scale of what's going to be required, Rob.
Okay.
I mean, assuming it goes ahead, I mean, we kind of were. It was Accountex 2021 where HMRC stood up on many sessions at Accountex Manchester last year. And when asked the question, is MTD going to be delayed, said, I can fundamentally assure you it's not. And the very next day, wow, HMRC made an announcement that it had been pushed back by 12 months.
Yeah.
So we're kind of at that time of now where if it's not going to go ahead, we're going to have to hear within the next kind of 6 to 8 weeks, I would imagine. But the principle is that it's still full steam ahead. And if it is full steam ahead, there is a massive task ahead for accounting firms and bookkeepers to get prepared for what needs to be done. So it's why it's still topical, because HMRC are only really now providing us any detail around what's needed. So from a learning point of view, firms have got a lot to learn. There's still loads of questions about the 10,000 threshold. Even I was talking to somebody at the event who was running a webinar earlier on this week, and they were still being asked the question, it's 10,000 profit, isn't it? No, it's 10,000 revenue. So if you've got a landlord, £10,000 of rental income, then they fall into the regime. So there's so much still to learn. So it's why it's still topical.
Did we get a sense, Will, of why it was deferred? You're talking about the sheer amount of work that still needs to be done. Is that on behalf of the HMRC or on behalf of the accountants and their clients out there?
So it's definitely both. The big fear, I think, at the moment is our HMRC going to be ready in terms of technical infrastructure that's required, given that they're only kind of in the last couple of months.
Oh, the joys of recording live. Well, did we get any sense about why HMRC deferred the decision? Was it that they were not ready? Did they feel the accounting profession and the clients were not ready? Why did it get put back?
I think it's all of those, Rob. So certainly if we think about what's due to happen in 15 months, whatever the timeline is now, the big fear is that HMRC are not going to be ready in terms of their technical infrastructure. The fact that they've only just in the last kind of couple of months really finalized what it looks like means that it's really difficult for the tech providers to build their solutions. We know that everybody's building new solutions at the moment. Sage are being very vocal about their MTD solutions. Dexter were talking about theirs at Accountex yesterday. So we know that there's all this stuff going on. But then there's the comms bit in terms of how do we make sure clients are are aware.
Mhm.
HMRC are very late to the party in terms of starting to prepare people for that, and that's a big concern. It's like we've only got 12 months really to be ready for this, and if you've got a firm even with, I don't know, 400 sole traders that are going to need to do this stuff, that's a huge education piece. It's a huge technology piece, and is it feasible? That's the million dollar question, and certainly I think last year when the announcement was made, it was recognition that they simply weren't ready.
Yeah. Would you put
So
£1 million on there being another deferral, Will?
I don't know. I think the big challenge is that if they defer it again, it's the third time,
Right.
and I think at that point it loses all credibility. It's almost they would have to go back to the drawing board and redesign it and have to call it something else.
Yeah.
Because I just think that the market would just say that this is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. I mean, I'm not having the conversations that some of the people I spoke to yesterday are having. So that's my kind of largely uneducated deep connection of what's going on. But where I sit, I think it'd be really hard for them to kind of get that across if they did defer it again.
Yeah, let's talk about the vendors, Will. We're all the big players there, and we saw some big investment in stands at London 2022, maybe because they had a war chest and they hadn't had Accountex for a couple of years, so they were building up a massive investment in their stands, massive presence. Talk to us about the vendor side of things.
Yeah, it's a different setup at Accountex Manchester, so there's not the same investment in stands. My understanding is it's largely kind of pods that are built. So some clearly had bigger pods than others, but it isn't quite the show that Accountex London is, where people are taking huge spaces and bringing in exhibition suppliers to build them bespoke stands. So there's a bit of limitation in terms of what they can do, but yes, all of the key players, the ones you'd expect to be there, were there, and the ones you'd expect to have the bigger stands had the slightly bigger stands. But as I said earlier, the feedback from vendors was that it was a really positive show, that visitors seemed to be there with intent. Talking to Dex particularly, there does seem to be this kind of awakening, probably driven by MTD, that right now's the right time. And it kind of fits with a number of other things that I've seen recently with firms talking about the opportunity for growth and starting to challenge in terms of why is there such a big opportunity for growth? Because the market itself isn't growing massively in terms, I'm talking here as accountants with an opportunity for growth. So if the market isn't growing and there are firms that are saying they're seeing growth that's outstripping the general market growth, then that's got to be coming from churn from other firms. So are we at that tipping point where clients are beginning to recognize that there is a distinction in terms of the service that they can get and the way that technology can support and underpin those services, that's driving people to actually look at a newer breed of service providers?
Yeah. Talking about the vendors still, Martin ran a show with me just recently where we reviewed Accountex London a few months afterwards. We've been doing a series of live interviews going out on our UK Matters in Accounting. We recorded 50 over the 2 days with various vendors and experts. And we just reviewed what the key takeaways were a few months afterwards. And Martin said one of the things that struck him about Accountex at the big show was the collaboration between vendors, their willingness to see that the pie is getting bigger, that they're a little bit more collegiate and open in their approach rather than being very guarded with their R&D and what they're planning. Did you sense that yesterday, that there was more strategic partnership conversations?
I think it's happening, but I would perhaps cynically say that it's perhaps something that hands are being forced, because the practitioner community is beginning to understand the interoperability between systems and the power of APIs. So we're perhaps getting to the point where vendors are seeing that actually, if they want to hang on to their customer base, they've got to start looking at how they can open up and work with other vendors, particularly in the big legacy solutions, perhaps that we've come to know and love over the last 20 years or so. But I think you're right that it's like the accounting community and collaboration is far greater than it ever was. Maybe we're just in a more collaborative and sharing society now, that's leading to people to think about opportunities of working collaboratively and together.
Yeah. And Will, you'd have been in full networking schmooze mode yesterday. A lot of people would have wanted a piece of you. Let's talk about the audience for a moment. Who were there? Who was watching the seminars? Who was wandering around and talking to the vendors? There's a lot of big accounting firms up there in the Northwest and the North generally. So did you get a sense it was a bit of everything?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly the conversations that I had reflected a real mix. I mean, if we think about the structure of accounting firms in the UK, there's far more micro firms than there are large firms anyway. So you're always going to get that kind of element of lots of smaller practitioners coming along, looking what's out there. Certainly most of the conversations I had were with firm owners and members of staff working in smaller firms. But I think it seemed more practice focused. I think with London, there's still a good element of kind of accountants in business, because some of the content is much more targeted towards a broader selection. If I don't know what the numbers were yesterday, I would hazard a guess it was 1,600, maybe a couple of thousand people, whereas London's 9,000 over 2 days. So there's a big difference between the numbers that come through. So in London there is a bit more focus on accountants in business theatres and so on. So it felt that it was very much a practitioner attendee at the session yesterday than we perhaps see at London.
Yeah, and just in closing, our regular listeners will know that I'm a former high school math teacher, and I'm going to ask you to give us a school report on Accountex, much in the same way as a teacher would give a school report. Generally, what you do is you give a grade, and then you say areas for improvement, or what they do well and what they don't do well. So can we put you on the spot, Will, with your teacher head on, and give Accountex Manchester a little grade and a comment for us in closing?
Yeah, I think definitely warrants a B+, and I think the comment is around delighted to see the progress that Accountex has made in the last 12 months.
Beautifully done. Thanks a lot, Will, for joining us on the UK Matters in Accounting podcast.
Pleasure.